Well, Bob Ward from the Grantham Research Institute on climate change and the environment joins us now for more on that. And Bob, we heard Lucy's report there. German officials say that a warming climate is at least partially to blame for the catastrophic flooding we've seen. I assume you'd agree with that?
Yes, it seems that the high number of deaths in a part of Germany that is used to dealing with flooding was caused by the fact that the volume of rainfall was just extraordinary. Some parts received the equivalent of 3 months rainfall just in a 24-hour period. And that caused the flooding to happen on a scale and with speed that they simply weren't prepared for, and many people just could not escape from it. So I think climate scientists have made absolutely clear that we are seeing this pattern of heavier rainfall around the world, and that's simple physics. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, and so when it rains more heavily.
So what urgent action can be taken?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the impacts of climate change are happening all around us, and they're going to continue to get worse as long as we keep putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The most ambitious plans on the table are to get us to zero emissions, perhaps by the middle of this century, which means for the next 3 decades, this is all going to get much worse, and we're just going to have to learn to cope better with this. We're going to have better warning systems to protect lives. We're going to have to be much stricter about where people can build homes and offices away from high-risk areas. That's not just around rivers, but that's also coastal regions, which are exposed to sea level rise and stronger storms. And of course, there are parts of the world that are going to see increasing droughts, which could lead to famine. And we're going to see heavy heat waves, as we've actually seen in northwest United States and western Canada only a few weeks ago. I'm afraid this is what it's going to be like, and it's going to get worse for the next 3 decades at least.
Talk about some of the climate change proposals unveiled by the EU this week. Do they go far enough?
Well, the European Union gave some further policy details this week to realize a target they've set of reducing their emissions, their annual emissions of greenhouse gases, by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 as part of their pathway to zero emissions by 2050. And so they announced changes to their carbon pricing system. It means putting a price on carbon now on aviation as well as on the electricity generation sector and heavy industry. And they're also going to set up a new carbon pricing system to deal with transport fuels and heating fuels. They've also talked about putting tariffs on in certain sectors so that countries which are not putting prices on carbon cannot therefore export to the European Union things like iron and steel or cement, and so that European industries are protected from those practices. So these are all steps forward to actually realizing the target that they've announced.
There's obviously a price for action, but also a consequence, a cost for inaction. Talk about the economic impact that we're going to see in these places.
Well, this flooding that we've seen across Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, I mean, it's certainly going to cost billions of euros, and I would expect tens of billions of euros when the final count comes down to it. So we can see this is happening all around the world, and it's lives being lost as well. You know, we've seen almost 200 deaths so far confirmed and likely to rise. We probably see hundreds of deaths in northwest United States and western Canada. So people are paying price with their lives and livelihoods, and I think most people will find that unacceptable. Unfortunately, this is going to be locked in for the next 3 decades, and we're going to have to get better at dealing with this. Particularly in developing countries, it's the poorer countries which are most vulnerable to these impacts because they cannot afford to protect themselves. So the rich countries have a responsibility to help poor countries to adapt and make themselves more resilient to these worsening impacts.
Bob Ward from Grantham Research Institute, thank you for your insight.